Hello, BookTube. It's a Sunday morning. Nice weather out there. Just sat around a bit being lazy and finished off a book that was recommended to me by Leonard Mayer in a comment to a previous video. And it was everything he said it was. It was a great read and I enjoyed it very much. It's Mike Ripley's Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. Has a foreword by Lee Child and this beautiful Alistair MacLean style cover. It's Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, the booming British thrillers from Casino Royale to The Eagle Has Landed, How Britain Lost an Empire but Its Secret Agent Saved the World by Mike Ripley, HarperCollins Publishers in 2017. Let me just read a little bit from the book jacket. When Ian Fleming dismissed his books in a letter to Raymond Chandler as straight pillow fantasies of the bang bang kiss kiss variety, he was being typically immodest. In 3 short years, his James Bond novels were already spearheading a boom in thriller fiction that would dominate the global bestseller lists. Since the war, Britain might have lost an empire and been crippled by debt, yet its fictional spies, secret agents, soldiers, sailors, and even journalists were now saving the world on a regular basis. The spread of eye-catching paperbacks in the 1960s not only boosted the careers of established thriller writers like Hammond Innes, who started out as my favorite, and I've enjoyed him for years, but also encouraged new entrants into the field, many from military and almost all of them male. From Ian Fleming and Alistair MacLean in the 50s through Desmond Bagley, Dick Francis, Len Knighton, and John le Carré in the 60s, to Frederick Forsyth and Jack Higgins in the 70s. These were boys' books providing a reader with thrills, adventure, and escapism, usually in exotic settings, or today's leading thriller writers, Lee Child puts it in the foreword, the thrill of immersion in a fast and gaudy world. So, these are the books that I basically grew up with. And in American childhood, they were dominated, my reading was dominated by British thriller writers and South African. And I did read them primarily in paperbacks. I've collected some of the hardbacks since because they last longer. But yeah, especially Hammond Innes, I would have the old white paperback covers, and then Alistair MacLean was everywhere. So they go on to say that in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, award-winning writer and critic Mike Ripley examines the rise of the thriller from the austere 50s through the boom time of the swinging 60s and early 70s. Drawing on conversations with many of the 150 authors mentioned in the book, he shows how British writers working very much in the shadow of World War II came to dominate the field of adventure thrillers and the 2 types of spy story, spy fantasy, which would be James Bond, that type of thing, a little less realistic, and then spy fiction, which would be like Dighton and le Carré. So the book, well put together. One of the things I love about it, I'm going to take this dust jacket off for a minute so I can show it to you easier. These end papers were fantastic because I would go through when I was doing this and see which one I have, and it was great fun, or which ones I remembered. And then I had some other people looking at it, and they did pretty much the same thing. Let me find one that's an obvious one. So right here is one I have in my collection, and really, you got a kick out of seeing it. So you see it right there, and then you see it right here. And another one, a very famous cover, and he talks about the artist in here. It's Raymond Hockey. I've got a couple of his. This was a you'll see it's right there, ground-breaking cover. A lot of people were upset about it, actually. Here's another Hockey cover for another Len Dighton volume. So that was great fun seeing there, and of course I recognized tons of them. Oh, here's another Odessa file. So where do I have that? Right. Where was it? Right there. So you can see that right there. So yeah, this was great fun. He goes through and Ripley goes through. So the Lee Child forward's only a couple pages, and it was excellent. And then Ripley goes through, and he goes through by decade. So you'll see here, he'll talk about the authors and volumes, and there'll be pictures of covers. And it brought back a lot of memories. I mean, Alistair MacLean. So it starts with this story of this World War II generation. Of course, Innes and people like Graham Greene and those had been writing from before the war. And Hammond Innes kept reinventing himself, and he would write the adventure thrillers. So you go to an exotic locale, and he had in real life been to them and was an accomplished sailor. And the adventure thriller would include Alistair MacLean. He did some other stuff too, but the Bear Island would be something that comes to mind. So just to give you an example of some, here's a Hammond Innes, here's an Alistair MacLean. Alistair MacLean dominated the scene for a long, long time. The whole Ian Fleming part is hard to overstate because, of course, everybody wanted to be the next Ian Fleming. James Bond not only dominated the bestseller list, the movies had a lot to do with that, too. A lot of these writers did knockoffs and wanted to be the next James Bond or Ian Fleming, but nobody made it. But anyway, very much enjoyed this volume, and he covers people like Eric Ambler, Coffin for Demetrios, wonderful thriller. He has a South African who bursts on the scene. This would be Wilbur Smith. Wilbur Smith would do not just the traditional type thrillers. He did adventure thrillers, but he also did a lot of historical thrillers. It's almost its own genre. And that one would come to play a role because the early paperbacks would all the time have a SWAT stick or some sort of symbolism that would jump off the paperback racks. A lot of them were called airport thrillers. Airport, people spend more time in the airports as time went on, and these paperbacks would be something to buy and read on a flight. In fact, the end of the British domination would be seen when those paperbacks were dominated by Robert Ludlum, an American. But the early days, the 50s, 60s, and early 70s especially, was just, it was a British monopoly. And British, you include writers from some of the Commonwealth. I mean, I think of guys like Desmond Bagley, who's more in the Hammond Innes tradition, where you were exotic locales and adventure. The spies would be think of Len Deighton was more of a, Len Deighton and John le Carré were more of a realistic, gritty, the spy world isn't all clean fantasy adventure with fast cars and casinos and fancy drinks and fancy clothes. But the advantage, one of the advantages of the book here is he has an appendix. Appendix 1 would be leading player. So hey, it would be Ian Fleming, Len Deighton, and he give you some details. He had a second appendix, what he called supporting cast, which were some of the lesser known, but still very readable writers. Brian Fremantle was one I've read. And then on top of that, there's a good section of notes and references. And also, here, let me get to it. there's acknowledgments and a bibliography that is excellent if this is a subject area that interests you, and a very good index. So as the 70s roll along, the British are seeing the Americans burst onto the scene with Ludlum and that type of thing. But there are still some excellent, and still are, some excellent British thriller writers, and probably one that comes to mind is Ken Follett in The Eye of the Needle. He went also on to write a lot more historical fiction, but this is a historical thriller in that it's, again, Nazi era, but it's being written at a later date, and it's by a generation after the original thriller writers had done the same thing. But Ripley shows that the American competition showed up mid-70s with Ludlum, would be this sort of thing. Big old novels. A lot of people were critical of them. Critics didn't like him. They thought it was, number one, I probably thought they sold too much. They were accused of being airport books. And people said the characters were wooden, the plots were contrived. All plots are contrived, right? But they were immensely popular, and they sold. And now, of course, we have the movies like the Bourne movies and all that, which are from Ludlum's characters. But in Britain, you started to see these American thrillers appear. And I grabbed two editions that I have that actually have British covers, even though they're American books. Because I still think that, just like with hockey on the Dighton cover, that the British covers are fantastic. And one of those, of course, would be Tom Clancy, The Hunt for Red October, and later Jack Ryan novels. Here's a British cover. Just wonderful thing. I hope I don't have too much glare. And then, of course, so that's sort of the military techno thriller. And then Clive Cussler would have to be in the tradition of Hammond Innes, Desmond Bagley, a little bit maybe Wilbur Smith. And this is a British cover of his Treasure of Caen. Again, fantastic artwork. There he is. So there are thriller writers. In Britain, the crime novel has sort of supplanted the market dominance that thrillers once had. In the United States, that's probably true too, although Cussler, he's a money-making machine, and I enjoy him very much. Good entertainment. So this I'd like to thank Leonard Mayer for letting me know about this, and he did that in the comments field, and I very much enjoyed it. I did hear a podcast with the author, Mike Ripley, about this volume, and it was fascinating. I'll try to figure out how to put it in the box below, but if I don't, the name of the podcast is Spybrary. It's a variation of library, but Spybrary. And excellent podcast devoted to thrillers and spy volumes. And they do have one episode, like I said, I'll try to link it to this. And it was very good. And there are other episodes on other podcasts are good too. So thank you, Leonard. Thank you, BookTube. And have a good weekend.